articles and things, find arguments against Sedevacantism. And that's no doubt because more and more people are becoming Sedevacantists or are seriously looking into the position once they've overcome the initial biases against it or misconceptions about it. Of course, for some people, the real hang-up is the name, Sedevacantism. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? Now, some of you listening might not know what it actually means. The term comes from the phrase sede vacante. That's Latin and means the chair being empty, and is in reference to the chair of St. Peter, which we believe is vacant. That is, there is no pope, and there has not been one since Pius XII died in 58, at least not that we have certain knowledge of. You know, Sedevacantists, Catholics, religion died, and their progeny, of course, plus new converts. That's really all it is. If you want to find one group of people that believe exactly what the church believed and taught while Pius XII was still pope, it's Sedevacantists. No other group that calls itself traditionally Catholic does that. Not the semi-trads. Nope. Not the Society of St. Pius, not the Fraternity of St. Peter and other indult groups, not the New Resistance SSPX. Now, I understand that they mean to, but they don't in actual fact. And since they acknowledge the modernist hierarchs as valid Catholic authorities, but nevertheless refuse their religion, they've had to mess with Catholic doctrine on church authority in order to justify that. You can't have the Catholic hierarchy teaching one thing and the faithful believing another. That's not how authority works in the Catholic Church, and in that case you might just as well not have a hierarchy at all, because it's worse than useless. It's dangerous to salvation. We Sedevacantists have simply remained what Catholics were up until 1988. We believe no strange new doctrines, and we do not refuse submission to anyone we acknowledge as a legitimate Catholic authority. Now, it's true that the consequence of that happened is that we are basically left bewildered, unable to point to any legitimate shepherds that we know of, but that is what it is. That's just the situation we find ourselves in. And St. Paul says in his second letter to the Corinthians, we walk by faith and not by sight. That's 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7. We have all the answers, but we don't have to have all the answers. And at least we don't mess around with church teaching to make it fit what we want to see. Because, once again, we're Catholic. So then, why don't we just call ourselves that? Why do we call ourselves Sedevacantists? That's such a cumbersome and scary-sounding word. Unfortunately, in our day, the term Catholic is totally ambiguous. Everyone claims to be a Catholic. Everyone, whether it's Richard Rohr or Nancy Pelosi on the left, or Robert Barron and Carl Keating in the center, or Bishop Richard Williamson and Aaron Horvat on the right. So to simply say we're Catholic doesn't, I'm afraid, tell you anything anymore. It just doesn't communicate what used to be. That is indeed